And welcome back to another Super Bowl week edition of Locked On Chiefs. I am Chris Clark. He is Seth Keysor. We're going to be talking a lot about today, a lot of different things today. A little bit of an injury report update, a little bit of talk about Chris Jones and the rookie cornerbacks, and then obviously getting into Patrick Mahomes and what he's going to mean in this game today on Locked On Chiefs.
From the land of the free and the home of the Chiefs, this is the Locked On Chiefs podcast.
I'm Chris Clark of the Locked On Chiefs podcast. Thank you for listening and making this your first listen every day. If you could go check out another show, maybe Locked On Eagles, Locked On NFL Draft, a lot of different things out there right now. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This episode of Locked On is brought to you by Nissan. The only thing more exciting than the big game is the all-new, all-electric 2023 Nissan Ariya. There's only a couple days left until the Super Bowl. Are you ready? The Nissan Ariya, the EV for people who love to drive. Learn more at nissanusa.com. All right, Seth, you have been talking and doing a lot of different article reviews all this week about a lot of different topics. We'll get into a couple of those in the next couple segments. But welcome back to Locked On Chiefs. Really excited to have you today.
You know what? It feels like it's been a minute and yet not that long. So I have someone ask me at least once a week, whether it's on Twitter or in the comments on the Chief of the North or wherever, when I'm going to get back on Locked On Chiefs. And I always tell them, like, at some point we will. At some point.
Yeah.
And they're like, when?
At some point. But I can't narrow it down as to when. And
yeah.
It makes a lot of sense. I mean, you got a lot of stuff going on. We have a lot of stuff going on. Kansas City's back in the Super Bowl for the third time in 4 years. We did get a little bit of an injury update with McCole Hardman going to IR and Clyde Edwards-Helaire coming back to the active roster.
Yeah, that was interesting. I mean, we kind of knew that was coming with McCole Hardman, and I think people that have been kind of looking at what they're doing, like, it would have been weird for them to be having Clyde practice if they weren't going to activate him. So my guess is, Jones will be inactive, and Edwards-Helaire will, I'm guessing, probably have the Jones role, as it were, which is basically, you're the backup. I know one thing that I've seen is that there's a lot of Chiefs fans kind of panicking, which isn't a super fair thing for Edwards-Helaire, but the reality of the situation is that McKinnon's played very well in the role he's been given, and Pacheco's played very well in the role he's been given. So fans are probably anxious about anything that might disrupt that. I'd be surprised if something disrupted it at this point. This has been the plan for Pacheco from like training camp on. It just took a while to really get it revved up. And McKinnon can do things in pass protection that Edwards-Helaire just can't. And so I don't think you're going to see too much of a disruption there.
I wonder also, when you start looking at all the things that they could be missing, we still don't know if Kadarius Toney is going to play. The thought is that he will. Juju is probably expected to play as well, considering he is talking to the media. So you would think that those guys are going to be back. Justin Watson should be back. But Clyde Edwards-Helaire actually gives you the ability to maybe use him even outside as a wide receiver on some routes and give you another option in case you have guys that go down.
It's something that they can do in terms of messing with personnel. They really love doing the 13 personnel stuff this year. And there's some options where you could run double running back sets and that kind of stuff to see if you can convince the Eagles to fiddle with their personnel a little bit. That would at least be interesting to see.
Yeah, and I really do think that when you start looking at this offense and what they're going to do in this game, 13 personnel is going to be huge. I do expect them to be in that probably, I don't know, maybe 30 to 40% of the time. I think that they're going to use it against the Eagles, try to get them to go their base defense and try to take advantage with the three tight ends that they have. And the question really becomes, what else can Kansas City add offensively to this game plan to really get the Eagles out of what they do, which is get after the quarterback?
I think one really unfortunate piece about McCole Hardman being missing, and I'm probably going to be writing about this to an extent later on this week, not just in terms of Hardman, but in terms of if I were Andy Reid. So one thing I did was I wrote what I would do if I were Reid or if I were Spags before the AFC Championship. I'm going to do that again for the Super Bowl, but in two separate articles this time. If you go back and look at what they did against the 49ers earlier this year, when they knew they were going up against Nick Bosa, who primarily lines up on the left side, just like Riddick does, that's obviously a mismatch against Andrew Wiley, and they know that. Graham is interesting because he's not as much a speed player anymore. He's a little more of a power player at this point, but he does still have a decent speed rush. So he might give Brown some problems, but the real mismatch there is on the right side. And so they obviously had that with Nick Bosa against the 49ers earlier this year. And you probably remember, if you're a Chiefs fan, Nick Bosa barely having an impact on that game. And one of the things they did is they just basically put him in hell in terms of running jet sweeps, screens, draws, all sorts of stuff to his side. And a lot of that featured Mecole Hardman, who is exceptional at running those. And there's an art to doing that. There's an art to knowing when to plant and move upfield, grab just whatever yards you can get or to drag it out to the edge. And you can see Sky Moore has gotten a little better with it, but it's still that's just not his game at this point. It takes a lot of experience, and Hardman does it really well. And if he can't go, Kadarius Toney does it really, really well as also. So I think you can do that without any drop off there. But if both of them are out, that makes things a little bit tougher, because I think that's one of the ways that they would slow him down, is make them pay for being too aggressive getting upfield.
Yeah, and I like what you're saying there. I do think they're going to use Kadarius Toney in that role. I also wonder if they make MVS go in that role if Toney isn't able to go. He did a couple of orbit motions, maybe not to the jet sweeps, but orbit motions in the last game. Didn't look very fluid doing it, but it was enough where Mahomes was getting ready to throw him a ball, I think on an orbit motion when he fumbled. So something to watch there, trying to get somebody in that motion to really get that defensive edge guy off of Andrew Wiley and make them think a little bit more.
Absolutely. And anything you can do to slow down the pass rush a little bit is something that you can give your offensive line just a split-second advantage. It's one reason why play action is so effective. It's not just about sucking up the linebackers. It's about forcing the defensive line rather than, attacking and penetrating to try to hold up at the point of attack. And it's really hard to transition from that into pass rushing. So I think it'd be interesting if Juju Smith-Schuster's healthy. They did run some stuff like that with him earlier this season. Then they really kind of moved away from it because it's not really his skill set. And because MVS has better top-end speed, maybe they like him better for that. I'm guessing they will keep using Sky Moore in that. He looked a little more comfortable with it in the AFC Championship than he did in the divisional round. But ultimately, Hardman being hurt makes Toney's health even more important. And he's kind of been the X factor in terms of, he can add a little juice to the team if he can stay healthy. And that's been the story of his career. So I know it's got a lot of Chiefs fans nervous.
Yeah, and there is going to be a lot more to talk about. We are going to talk about Patrick Mahomes in the third break, but we're going to talk about Chris Jones, the pass rush, and really these rookie corners in this next break. Seth actually did some great articles on both Jones and the rookies on the back end. But I want to tell you about our friends over at PrizePicks. One of the things that you look at when you talk about PrizePicks is you go and you pick 2 to 6 players and you decide whether or not you think that they can hit an over or under, and that's what you bet. In this game, they have Jalen Hurts set at 238.5 passing yards. Patrick Mahomes is at 285.5. I think I'm probably looking at the over on Patrick Mahomes. That's a question for you to answer, but that is definitely something that you ought to check out. This format is fantastic. You get 2 to 6 players, you make your bet. And if they score more or less than their PrizePicks projection, you can win up to 25 times your money on any entry. No competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available. PrizePicks offers projections on any sport that you watch. This includes NFL, NBA, Major League Baseball, NHL, PGA, college football, all of them. Men's college basketball, cricket. I'm not sure how you bet on PrizePicks on that, but you can. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that easy. Safe and fast withdrawals. Currently operational in over 30 states and Canada. Download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you $50. Don't forget to enter promo code Locked On at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. All right, Seth, so there's a lot to talk about when we start looking at this game, but one of the key players that had a huge impact in the AFC Championship game was Chris Jones. He's got to have another huge impact in this game.
It'll be interesting to see how the Eagles deal with Jones. Their guards are fine, but they're not special. And I think Dickerson might be at some point. He's pretty good, but he hasn't been as high level as I thought maybe he'd be coming out. But he's a decent player. There's not the same mismatch there that you get with the Bengals. And part of that is just, obviously the existence of Jason Kelce, who's the best center in football. I think what you're going to see is that it's going to depend on whether or not the Eagles trust their very, very good, probably the best in the league, offensive line, to do what it normally does, or whether they try to go the Cincinnati route and dedicate a bunch of extra attention to Jones. That didn't work out well for Cincinnati, but part of that reason was some of their guys weren't holding up really well one-on-one. And so if you're Cincinnati and you say to yourself, well, we trust the rest of our line to win one-on-ones. We trust our excellent tackles to win against, Dunlap, Karlaftis, and Clark. We trust Kelce to win one-on-one if he's alone against Mike Dana, or one of our guards can win alone against Mike Dana. And so we'll just slide protection to Jones all night. It creates a different sort of problem. And so it's really going to be on the guys around him as well as Spagnuolo to come up with a defensive game plan that tries to mitigate the perceived advantage and probably real advantage that the Eagles have in the trenches. I expect Spags to send a lot of heat early. I think he's going to give Hurts the young quarterback treatment and just see how he deals with it. Spags has done that time after time after time. I'm going to be writing about this later this week. And Hurts, who's been exceptional this year, has not always been exceptional against the blitz. Now, he's not always bad against it, but over time, the aggregate numbers are not particularly good. And so I think that's going to be, those things are going to combine with Jones and them finding some ways to get him those one-on-one matchups the same way they did against the Bengals. A lot's been made, and rightfully so, about the fact that they had their defensive tackles lining up wider than they have most other times this season on the outside shoulder of the guards to try to generate some one-on-one matchups. I think you'll see some of that again. And so basically that's a way of trying to say, okay, you've got a superstar right tackle, a superstar center, a star left tackle. Your guards are okay. So we're going to try to find one-on-one matchups there. So I think that's what you're going to see a lot of. And if he can take over even half as much as he did against the Bengals, that should be enough in terms of helping push them forward.
Well, and Jones has a key piece in that. You're talking about being half as good as he was against the Bengals. He was phenomenal, probably the best game I've seen him play as a pro. Mm-hmm. But then you start adding in the guys on the back end. You start looking at all the rookies that you talked about. But one of the bigger additions that could come back, and it sounds like he's probably looking like he will be back since they're having him talk on media day, is L'Jarius Sneed. And he could be huge blitzing like you talked about, because you're right. Jalen Hurts has not been great against the blitz. He's been okay, but his EPA per play goes way down when they start sending 5 rushers.
Well, and the great thing about having L'Jarius Sneed back, which I think he probably will be, you like you said, you can kind of read something into the availability with the media to an extent. It's Super Bowl week. They're going to let these guys rehab as they come back. Generally speaking, a concussion doesn't take 2 weeks to come back from, especially if you don't have a significant history of it. So I expect him to be back. And what is great about having Sneed back, especially now that people are starting to see how well Trent McDuffie has been playing, I'd argue Trent McDuffie might be the best cover corner on the team. Maybe Sneed is the best overall corner, but I mean, it's close. It's not like the way, we would have called it earlier in the season. The great thing about McDuffie is, much like Sneed, he is a very, very physical corner. He finishes well. He tackles really well. And he doesn't just hit hard. He tackles well. And both of them have that in common. And they're both guys that corner well and handle contact well. And so they're guys that you can blitz. So when you combine them with Justin Reed and Willie Gay Jr., all of them are exceptional athletic blitzers. That gives Spags his largest amount to kind of move guys around, try to mix up coverages, which is what he loves to do as part of sending really complicated zone blitz looks. He wants to be able to mix things up considerably on the back end. It's not just about sending 5 or 6 guys. You got to make it look different on the back end. Otherwise, Hurts is a smart guy. He's going to find that empty spot and just pepper it. But if you can mix the looks up and having McDuffie as well as Sneed as potential blitzers from either side in the slot, that's a huge deal.
Yeah, it's absolutely huge. And you saw McDuffie in this last game against Cincinnati tackle Jamar Chase in space by himself.
I didn't know it could be done.
It was phenomenal. And that is something that Kansas City has really missed at times at corner over the past several years. Snead has been very good, but these rookies in general have been fantastic at tackling the ball carrier, whether it's a wide receiver or running back, basically where they hit them. They haven't been missing a lot of tackles. That could be a huge key in this game.
Absolutely. It's something they really had to do better. And it's one of the things they did do better against Cincinnati. Lost in the conversation about just Chris Jones or just Patrick Mahomes or just Travis Kelce or just Marquez Valdez-Scantling is the fact that the Chiefs defense overall played the Bengals significantly better than they've played them previously.
Yeah, and it was absolutely huge for that game. When we get back, we're going to talk a little bit about Patrick Mahomes and what you saw in the film going into this week and what you expect from him in this Super Bowl game. But I want to tell you about our friends over at Built Bar. If you've not checked them out yet, you definitely need to go check out Built Bar. If you're looking for a delicious treat but don't want all the fat and the calories, then you've got to try a Built Bar. What makes Built Bar so good? Well, for starters, they're covered in 100% real chocolate. That's right, real chocolate. And they come in unbelievable flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, and coconut almond. And now you don't need to wait to get around to get a box. For years, we've been talking about ordering your Built Bars at Built.com. Now you can get them at your local Walmart or Sam's Club. That's right. Head to your nearest Walmart today, walk to the pharmacy section, and grab yourself a box of Built Bars. You can pick up a 4-bar box of cookies and cream, double chocolate, or coconut puffs. If you're close to a Sam's Club, run in and grab a 13-bar box with our hit flavors, brownie batter, and churro. You can thank me later. All right, Seth. Now we get to the fun part of the conversation. You start looking at what Patrick Mahomes was able to do against the Bengals and what he might be able to do against this Eagles team that is very good, but they haven't played a quarterback that is quite on Mahomes' par.
They have.
Or anywhere close, for that matter.
And it's interesting. Right now, I'm working on my first of what I plan on doing 3 kind of Super Bowl previews. The first one's going to be kind of that I don't really know who the Eagles are. I've looked at them a little bit. Really impressive team. I mean, they 100% deserve to come out of the NFC. It would have been nice to see the Niners against them with a quarterback because essentially, and I understand that, Johnson was healthy for a little while in the game, but even then you could tell, I mean, they had 3 or 4 delay of games with him in there. They didn't have a quarterback in there that is remotely prepared to run the offense. And then they didn't have a quarterback, period. So it's hard to know really about their defense with that. And one thing that's interesting is, you can't really take a lot away from that Niners game. And you can't. You watch that game, that tells you nothing about their defense. It just doesn't. So, we'll go back to next week. Daniel Jones and the Giants. I don't know.
And he was one of the best quarterbacks they played all year.
And that's accurate. It's a really well-coached Giants team, but lacks talent. They had no problem just lining up their guys one-on-one against their receivers. The Giants don't have a Travis Kelce to make you pay for things. They barely even have like a Valdez-Scantling who can make you pay down the field. They just don't have that same setup. And obviously, Jones isn't Mahomes. The best quarterbacks they faced this year, if you throw out Trevor Lawrence because they played in a monsoon. So that I don't know what you can take from that. You've got Dak Prescott. You've got Jared Goff and Kirk Cousins.
Aaron Rodgers.
2022 Aaron Rodgers. I don't know if he belongs in the conversation with those other 3 guys.
That's fair.
But they did play Rodgers. That's a good point. And so with all of those teams, Goff is who he is, and the Lions put up points on them. Dak and the Cowboys, they ran kind of hot and cold on offense. They put up points on them. They had a better performance against Rodgers. But we all know Rodgers was, I think he was throwing to Christian Watson and then you and me. And so these things.
But they put points up on him too. That was the only reason I threw Rodgers out is because they put up, I think, 33 in that game. Yes, Philadelphia still won, but they scored 40. So it's just a little bit different.
Right. And that's where they for a team that's lauded for being really balanced on offense and defense. And this is where it gets interesting because performing really well against bad competition doesn't mean you won't perform well against good competition, especially when you have talent. And they have tons of talent. They are just disgustingly talented up front. Grabbing Joseph to play nose tackle for them midseason, terrific move. And one thing that Chiefs fans should note is that the Chiefs struggled to run the ball against the Bengals, which they usually do because they can't handle DJ Reader. They just can't. And Joseph is not an easy man to move. And they've got a lot of big guys in the middle in addition to their pass rushers along the edges. And so they're really talented. Their corners have been playing really well all year. Their safeties and linebackers aren't quite as tested. Now, they've got good players there, too. So I'm trying to be careful with this because it's so easy to be, you're talking trash on the Eagles and that kind of stuff. But the reality is they just haven't had to play very many, if any, elite offenses this year. San Francisco would have been the first one. And right. San Francisco was moving the ball before Purdy got hurt. Right. So who knows how it would have gone? It's hard to say. And who knows how the game might go. Their defensive line is so good that they can dominate a game. But there's so much unknown there. And that's what makes them so interesting to write about is, and that's one of the first things I'm going to focus on is what do we really know about them and kind of just walk through who they've played. And it's going to be a really fine line to walk to make sure I'm not saying they're bad. I'm saying I don't know. I'm saying on paper, they look incredibly talented. And in practice, for the most part, they've played really well. Except when they played offenses that are above average, they haven't always played that well. And it's just interesting. Now, their offense has been like a meat grinder. I mean, they've second best offense in the league. But once again, they haven't played exactly a murderer's row. It's not like going through Cincinnati. They haven't had to do that. And it's actually it's a testament to how good a thing it is to get that first round bye. Because all it takes is one or two weird things, and you got to go through Daniel Jones and then a team without a quarterback. And you're in the Super Bowl. And again, the Eagles have earned it. This clip is going to end up getting played by some Eagles site. And I really like the Eagles overall. I think their roster construction is great. I really like a lot of players on the teams. I love Hurts. I love Jason Kelsey. I'm just saying I don't know. That's all I'm saying.
No.
For the love of God, people, please be nice to me.
No, and I get it. I completely get it. You don't know because what they have shown this season is when they go up against better competition, when you start looking at the quarterbacks and the play of how they played out throughout the season, they've struggled against the better competition. So that's a question. How's it going to play out? Now, the one thing that I will throw out there is you go back and you watch Kansas City playing the 49ers and what they were able to do against one of the other best defenses in the NFL. Granted, the 49ers had some injuries. They had some guys coming back from injuries. That's going to be a little bit different. But you're still in a situation where Kansas City was able to move the ball. Patrick Mahomes was able to do things, and they really beat the 49ers bad.
They did. And it'll be interesting to see because the games where the offense struggled a little this year, and struggled is a relative term. So, like, you take, like, Indy, they had some catastrophically horrifying things happen to them. But the offense overall, relatively speaking, struggled as well. But you've got drop touchdowns by Travis Kelce. You've got freakish special team stuff and losing up front. That's one thing where when the offense has struggled or been a little more inconsistent, what it's had in common is a team that has been designed to win up front loses. And that's where I think you can make the argument from the Eagles side is, hey, they are built to win up front against the Chiefs O-line. And that has a way of taking them at a disadvantage. It's easier to say than to do, but they definitely have the personnel to do it if anyone does.
Yeah, and it's going to be very important for Andy Reid to have a great scheme and a great, play calling day, and for the Chiefs not to beat themselves. But when you watch what Mahomes was able to do against the Bengals, he was able to do enough on an injured ankle. Now he's got 2 more weeks to prepare for the Eagles. What are you expecting to see from him?
I mean, we've never seen Mahomes, the worst Mahomes has played in some ways. It was, the first half by and large against the 49ers in the Super Bowl. He was incredible against the Bucs, but we all know how that turned out with how everything else was going around him. He's been so good in these playoffs. I think it's kind of helped wash out the taste of the second half of the AFC Championship game last year. And it's worth noting that before that half, that one half, and now remember, this is Mahomes' 5th year doing all this. It was basically one half of football, and then I guess you could say the first half against the Patriots in his first AFC Championship. It was considered a given that Patrick Mahomes would be unbelievable in the playoffs. And I think people kind of forgot that because of what happened in the AFC Championship last year, that it's treated like a little more like, well, we'll see how he does. Well, he's been nothing short of exceptional. And specifically in the AFC Championship, what I wrote about was he had to win in different ways than how he normally does. He wasn't able to run around as much, and so he had to contain himself, make his movement smaller, win within the framework of the offense in a way that there are still some naysayers out there that say that he can't. Well, that's exactly what he did against a good defense that had been playing really well, that generally speaking, Big Lou, Anarumo, I hope he gets hired out of the AFC because he's one of the few defensive coordinators that goes shot for shot with Andy. And so Mahomes didn't have his usual freakish mobility edge. He didn't have his Andy Reid edge. He didn't have Tyreek Hill. He didn't have half his receiving core by the time it was all said and done. And he still was able to get it done by setting up his protections well, going through reads quickly and confidently, and throwing the ball accurately. All this, like, one might call it quarterbacking, that it's that he is absolutely 100% elite at. So that was really fun to watch. If the Eagles don't dominate up front in the same vein that the Bucs did a couple years ago, I anticipate we'll still see an incredible version of Mahomes. And I think even if they do, we'll still see an incredible version of Mahomes. I'm curious, 2 weeks, another 2 weeks is a long time to recover from a high ankle sprain, but I'd be surprised if he's completely past it. So that'll be kind of interesting to see, how far past it are you? I know they're listing him. He's not limited at all. And I understand he's a freak of nature, but it would be weird 3 weeks after high ankle sprain and having played through it multiple times that he'd be 100% good to go. But here's hoping.
Yeah, and I'm really curious to see what he looks like coming out of the field or coming out the first drive, the second drive, seeing how he's able to move in the pocket and do Mahomes type things. The thing I will say, though, is I think he's going to be a lot better off, obviously, with another 2 weeks rest and a lot closer to the guy that we saw start the Jaguars game. And I'm telling you, I think he was on pace for a 40-point game against the Jaguars before he got hurt.
Oh, no doubt in my mind about that. They were on their way to scoring their first 4 drives. It was going to be a slaughterhouse, I think. And that was with them getting pressure early. They were sending some of their best stuff early and getting home. And it wasn't mattering. And they were going to catch up with that stuff. They caught up with it with Henny. They were 100% going to catch up with it with Mahomes. And so I'm excited to see that too.
All right. Well, Seth, thank you so much for coming on. Really do appreciate it. You can go find him. Go tell them where they can find you, Seth.
You can find me on Twitter at RealMNChiefsFan. You can, of course, find me over at Times Hours. It's an enemy podcast, but you can listen to it anyway. And you can find me at the Chief of the North newsletter at mnchiefsfan.substack.com. We have some fun there. You're gonna see my written stuff preparing for the Super Bowl there.
Seth, again, I really do appreciate it. And that is going to be it for us today. Thank you all for listening. If you haven't already, please go hit the like, subscribe, and notification bell on YouTube. We do appreciate that. And go leave us an iTunes review or on Spotify as well. Seth, again, enjoy this week. Chiefs are in the 3rd Super Bowl in 4 years. A lot of fun going on in Kansas City right now. Appreciate you coming on, bud.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening today, and we will be back tomorrow.